Act like you're mine tonight." The words cut through the music and laughter like a blade, sharp, certain, leaving Chloe with no air to breathe. She blinked, stunned, her glass tilting dangerously in her hand, but before she could form a single protest, his fingers tightened around hers. The contact was undeniable, deliberate, a grip that spoke not of chance but of decision. William Maddox didn't ask. He never asked. Chloe knew who he was. Everyone in that room knew. But knowing from headlines and whispered stories was nothing compared to the reality of his presence, towering and inescapable. His voice, low and dangerous, lingered in her chest like smoke. He didn't repeat himself, didn't give her the mercy of time. He simply moved, pulling her forward, and she followed, because resisting felt impossible when every eye in the grand hall had already shifted toward them. The room was alive with curiosity. She could feel the shift ripple through the tables, forks pausing mid-air, wine glasses frozen just before lips, conversations stuttering into silence as people tried not to stare, yet failed miserably. It was like the music had dimmed, the laughter had dropped, and the world had narrowed to one impossible truth. William Maddox, the man who never paraded women in public, who had no time for scandalous attachments, who lived in rumors and boardroom wars, was walking hand in hand with Chloe Bennett. Chloe, whose name had never grazed a society column, who didn't own a dress worth half of what the women around her wore, who wasn't anyone. Her mind screamed at her to break away, to laugh it off as a mistake, to escape before this spun out of control, but then he glanced down at her. Not a smile, not even softness, just a flick of his eyes, a warning. "Smile," he murmured, his lips barely moving, his tone carrying the kind of authority that made her stomach clench. And so she did, not because she wanted to, but because somehow her body obeyed before her brain caught up. The curve of her lips must have been convincing, because the room's hum returned, low but thick with speculation. Chloe felt herself drowning under the weight of whispers, the sharp, assessing stares, the disbelief. Every woman at the banquet tables looked like she wanted to cut her apart. Every man studied her like she was a mystery they hadn't been briefed on. And through it all, William Maddox looked untouched, composed, in control, like he had orchestrated this moment from the beginning. He guided her past James Thornton, who sat lounging in his chair with that smirk Chloe would later learn to dread. James's gaze flicked over her, then lingered in amusement before meeting William's. Finally decided to bring someone into the spotlight. James said, his words honeyed and cruel all at once. "Didn't think you had it in you." William didn't falter. His hand pressed lightly into the curve of Chloe's back, steady, almost protective, and he met James's stare with the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. "She's different," James added, eyes narrowing slightly. Unexpected, Chloe's lungs squeezed, her heart ricocheting inside her chest. But William leaned close to her ear, his breath brushing her skin. "Kiss my cheek," he whispered. Her body went rigid. "What? Do it," he said, with a finality that left no room for refusal. The entire table was watching. Her hands trembled, but she rose on her toes, pressing her lips lightly against the edge of his jaw. The room seemed to exhale in unison. James chuckled, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a tension Chloe didn't understand. William, however, turned his head slightly, his mouth so close to hers it made heat surge through her. "Good girl," he murmured, so low she nearly doubted she heard it. They moved on before she could collapse from the weight of what she had just done. She didn't notice Haley across the room, staring at her with wide eyes, mouthing her name in disbelief. She didn't notice the other men who whispered into their glasses, or the women already calculating how quickly they could dig up her past. All she noticed was William, the way he filled every inch of space beside her, the way he owned the air she breathed. He led her to the center of the room, where the music swelled into a dance. Without pause, he drew her into his arms. His hand settled at her waist like it belonged there, his steps precise, graceful, commanding. Chloe stumbled once, but his grip tightened, correcting her, making it look intentional to the eyes circling them. "Why me?" she finally hissed, her voice low, her chest brushing his as they moved. His gaze stayed locked on hers, unflinching, unreadable. "Because you don't fit," he said, "and that makes you perfect." She swallowed, her throat tight. Perfect for what? His jaw flexed, his eyes flicking for just a moment toward James across the room. Then back to her. "For tonight." They spun, the crowd blurring, her confusion mounting. None of it made sense. She wasn't rich, she wasn't polished, she didn't belong here. But when William's hand curved against her back, steady and firm, she almost believed she did. Almost believed this wasn't just an act. The music ended, applause erupted, and William Maddox didn't let her go. Chloe didn't breathe until the applause faded and William finally guided her away from the center of the hall. Her hand was still wrapped in his, her pulse fluttering against his grip, and she realized he hadn't released her since the moment he claimed her. Every instinct told her to demand answers, to pull back, to stop playing along in a game she didn't understand. But the weight of the crowd pressed on her shoulders, their curiosity still lingering even though the music had resumed. She felt like prey caught in a spotlight, the gazes following her every step, dissecting, calculating. William stopped near the far corner, just close enough to the gilded windows that the light poured across his sharp features. His face was carved in composure, yet his eyes, deep, unreadable, never left hers. "Don't speak," he said before she could even open her mouth. His voice wasn't harsh, but it wasn't kind either. It was command dressed as suggestion, the kind of tone people obeyed without realizing it. Chloe's throat burned with questions, but the tension in his jaw silenced her. For a moment, it was only the two of them, their breaths uneven, the murmur of the gathering distant. Then a voice sliced through. "William." Michael Carver, a man Chloe recognized from magazines, approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tall, perfectly styled, his presence radiated polished arrogance. His gaze slid to Chloe, lingering like a challenge. "And who might this be?" William's grip on her waist tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is Chloe," he said smoothly. "She's with me." The way he said it left no room for dismissal, no room for Michael to doubt that Chloe was more than a fleeting amusement. Michael's smile sharpened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features before he chuckled softly. "Interesting. I didn't think you were the type to surprise us." Chloe forced a polite smile, though her insides nodded. Michael's eyes stayed on her, curious, amused, dissecting her like she was a puzzle he fully intended to solve. "Well, Chloe, welcome to our little circle." His tone was syrupy, mocking, but before she could respond, William shifted slightly in front of her, his body a subtle barrier. "She doesn't need your welcome," William said flatly. The tension was electric, unspoken history weaving between the two men. Michael raised his glass in mock surrender, his smirk never fading, before drifting away into the crowd. Chloe exhaled shakily, realizing she had been holding her breath again. "What is going on?" she whispered, barely audible. William's hand brushed down her arm, his touch deliberate, calculated to appear tender to anyone watching. "You'll know soon enough," he murmured. His vagueness only fueled the storm in her chest. She opened her mouth to push him, to demand clarity, but before she could, Haley appeared at her side. Her friend's eyes were wide, lips parted in disbelief. "Chloe, what are you?" Haley cut herself off when she noticed William, her cheeks flushing. "Mr. Maddox," she said awkwardly, her voice trembling. William acknowledged her with the faintest nod, his attention sliding back to Chloe as though Haley were a ghost in the room. Chloe's stomach twisted. Haley had no idea why Chloe was here, why she was standing at the center of something that felt too big, too dangerous. "I need to," Chloe began, but William's hand closed around hers again. "Stay with me," he said, loud enough for Haley to hear, soft enough to pin Chloe in place. Haley's eyes darted between them, her expression confused, almost betrayed, but she forced a brittle smile and excused herself. The knot in Chloe's chest grew tighter. She wanted to chase her, to explain, but William's presence anchored her, unyielding. Another couple approached, then another, their faces blurring into a series of introductions. Names she couldn't hold on to, compliments that felt barbed, smiles that never touched their eyes. Every woman looked her over with envy wrapped in disdain. Every man studied her with suspicion. Through it all, William kept her tethered to him, his hand on her waist, his arm brushing hers, his voice low and even whenever he spoke. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of strangers, yet he was the only thing holding her upright. Hours blurred. Laughter swelled. Glasses clinked. Music shifted. But Chloe's world remained small, orbiting around the enigma of William Maddox. When they finally broke from the crowd, slipping into a quieter corridor lined with tall windows, Chloe sagged against the wall, her head spinning. "Enough," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I can't. You can." William interrupted, his tone firm. He stepped closer, his height casting her in shadow, his scent a heady mix of cedar and something darker. "You already have." Her pulse hammered. "Why me?" The question tore out of her, desperate, aching. His gaze locked onto hers, unwavering. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick, unbearable. Finally he spoke. "Because tonight, I needed someone I could trust." She blinked, stunned. "You don't even know me." A ghost of something flickered in his eyes. Pain, memory, something she couldn't name. "Exactly," he said. Before she could unravel his words, footsteps echoed down the hall. James appeared, his smirk carved sharper than ever. He leaned casually against the doorframe, but his eyes were cold, predatory. "Interesting choice, William," James drawled, his gaze flicking to Chloe. "She doesn't fit, which makes me wonder, what's her purpose?" William's jaw clenched, his body shifting slightly in front of her again. "Don't," he warned. James's smirk widened. "You're slipping. And when you slip, everyone in this room sees it." His gaze lingered on Chloe, a spark of curiosity darkening into something dangerous. "And I'll find out why she's here." With that, he vanished back into the noise of the gathering, leaving silence in his wake. Chloe's stomach turned to ice. William's hand pressed against the wall near her head, his body close, his eyes burning with something fierce and unreadable. "Stay close to me," he said, low and final. "No matter what happens tonight." Chloe's fingers trembled as she pressed them into the folds of her dress, trying to ground herself. William's words echoed in her chest like a warning bell. But before she could ask more, the laughter and clinking of glasses spilled back into the corridor. Guests brushed past in little clusters, and William straightened, his composed mask sliding back into place with terrifying ease. His hand found hers again, and the silent command in his grip left no room for argument. He led her back toward the gathering, their path illuminated by chandeliers that weren't made of gaudy crystal but gleamed with molten bronze, light rippling across the polished floor like liquid gold. It was beautiful, dazzling even, but Chloe barely saw any of it. Her attention was locked on the man at her side, whose calmness felt like a storm coiled too tightly. They hadn't taken 3 steps into the crowd when Haley reappeared, her smile too forced to be real. She held her glass high, trying to appear casual, but Chloe recognized the suspicion in her eyes. "There you are," Haley said sweetly. "I was beginning to think you'd vanished in a thin air." With him, her gaze flicked to William, then back to Chloe. The air thickened. Chloe opened her mouth, but William was faster. "She's exactly where she should be," he said smoothly, his tone leaving Haley no room to push further. For a beat, Haley's smile faltered, and Chloe wanted to scream. She wanted to explain, to tell her friend this wasn't what it looked like, but she couldn't. Not here. Not with William's hand still tethering her. "Dance with me," William said suddenly. He didn't ask. He led, and though Chloe wanted to resist, wanted to rip her hand free, her body followed him into the center of the dance floor where a soft waltz began to rise from the orchestra. Whispers followed them like shadows. Chloe could feel every eye, every darting glance, every narrowed smile that silently questioned her presence. William's hand settled at her waist, and she stiffened, the warmth of his palm sending sparks across her nerves. He guided her effortlessly, his movements fluid, precise, as though every detail had been calculated long before tonight. "You're doing well," he murmured, his breath grazing her ear. "Better than I expected." Her heart thundered. "I'm not doing anything. I don't even know why I'm here." "You're here," he said, spinning her smoothly, "because I need you to be, and because they need to believe you're mine." "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice frayed. His jaw tightened. "Everyone." Chloe's stomach sank, but before she could ask more, her heel caught slightly against the polished floor. William caught her instantly, pulling her closer than before, his chest pressed against hers, his heartbeat steady while hers raced out of control. For a single dizzy moment, the world narrowed to just him, his hand steady on her back, his breath warm at her temple, his presence overwhelming. Then a voice sliced through the music like a blade. "Careful, William. Wouldn't want your new toy to break so soon." Chloe stiffened. James stood at the edge of the dance floor, his smile wicked, his eyes sharp as knives. Guests near him chuckled uneasily, pretending not to notice the venom in his tone, but Chloe felt the sting of every word. William didn't flinch. His hand remained steady on her waist, his expression unreadable as he turned them slightly, shielding her from James's gaze. "Ignore him," William said lowly, though the muscle in his jaw twitched. "You want a reaction. Don't give it to him." But Chloe couldn't ignore the way James's eyes followed her, dissecting her every move as though she were an exposed secret. She clung tighter to William's hand, not out of trust but necessity. If she faltered now, if she revealed she didn't belong, the illusion would shatter, and she wasn't ready for what came after. The song ended, and the applause masked the tension, but Chloe felt it lingering, heavy and poisonous. William led her off the floor, past clusters of curious faces, until they reached a smaller archway leading into a dimly lit lounge. The noise of the crowd dulled behind them, replaced with the crackle of a low fire and the faint scent of aged leather. Here, away from the constant scrutiny, Chloe finally yanked her hand free. "Enough," she hissed, her voice shaking. "I don't care who you are or what game you're playing. I'm not your puppet." Her chest heaved, her throat raw with words she hadn't realized she'd been holding back all night. William turned slowly, his expression as calm as ever, but his eyes betrayed something else, something dangerous. "You think you have a choice?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that it sent a chill crawling up her spine. "Chloe, I pulled you into this because I had to, because it was the only way to keep them from seeing blood tonight." Her breath caught. "Blood?" He stepped closer, his gaze hardening. "There are things you don't understand, things I don't expect you to understand. But what I need from you tonight is simple. Stand by me. Pretend. Play your part. And in return, I will make sure nothing touches you." His words were a promise and a threat all at once. Chloe's heart raced, her skin prickling with fear, but beneath it, something else stirred. A flicker of curiosity. What could possibly be so dangerous that William Maddox, untouchable billionaire, needed her to shield him? She opened her mouth to push him further, but before she could, the door behind them creaked. Chloe spun, and her breath hitched. A man she didn't recognize stood in the doorway, his features half-shadowed, his expression unreadable. His eyes slid to William, then to her, and a smile tugged at his lips. "So it's true," he said softly. "The great William Maddox has finally chosen someone." Chloe's stomach nodded, though she didn't know why. The man's presence felt wrong, too casual, too certain. William's shoulders tensed, the first crack in his perfect composure, and Chloe realized with dawning horror that this wasn't part of the performance. This was something else, something real. William stepped in front of her, his voice clipped. "Not here. Not tonight." The man chuckled darkly. "Then I'll wait." But his gaze flicked to Chloe, slow and deliberate. "Won't always be behind you to hide." He vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving only silence and the pounding of Chloe's heart. She clutched the back of a chair for balance, her knees threatening to buckle. "Who was that?" she whispered. William didn't answer immediately. His hand brushed hers, steadying her, though his face was carved from stone. The reason you can't walk away. Chloe's heart was still hammering long after the man's shadow disappeared through the lounge door. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise of the gathering they'd just escaped. It clung to her skin, wrapping around her throat like invisible hands. She turned to William, searching his face, desperate for some thread of clarity. But his expression remained stone, sharp edges, unreadable, a mask carved too perfectly to slip. "Who was that?" she whispered again, her voice trembling more than she wanted. William's jaw flexed once, the only crack in his facade. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against her arm, steadying but also firm, as though grounding her in place. "Someone who doesn't belong here," he said at last, his voice low. Chloe's breath caught. "Then why?" "Because tonight," William cut in, his eyes locking on hers, "everyone who isn't supposed to belong will try to slip through." He leaned closer, his words nearly brushing her lips. "And if they realize you don't belong either, you won't make it out of here unscathed." Her stomach dropped. 1,000 protests swirled in her chest. She didn't sign up for this. She wasn't anyone's shield. She should just walk out. But the weight in his gaze pinned her. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't even fear. It was something harder, heavier, like a truth too dangerous to name. The door to the lounge creaked again, pulling them both taut with tension. But this time, it was Michael. His smile entered the room before he did, polished and predatory, eyes gleaming with the kind of curiosity that always smelled like blood. "Ah," he drawled, his gaze flicking from William to Chloe. "So this is where you've been hiding. Cozy." William's shoulders straightened, his body instinctively shifting half an inch forward, blocking Michael's line of sight to Chloe. "We weren't hiding." Michael's smile widened, though it didn't touch his eyes. "Of course not. William Maddox never hides. But tell me, isn't it strange? Introducing someone no one has ever heard of, someone who suddenly appears at your side like she's always belonged? People are talking, and when they talk, they get ideas." Chloe's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. She wanted to shrink back, to vanish into the wall, but William's hand slipped down, brushing hers just enough to keep her tethered. "Let them talk," William said, calm, smooth, but Chloe could feel the heat simmering beneath. "Ideas are harmless, until someone acts on them." Michael tilted his head, studying Chloe now like a scientist dissecting a specimen. "She doesn't look harmless." His voice was silk over glass, dangerous no matter how softly spoken. "But then again, neither do you." Chloe's chest tightened under his scrutiny, every second stretching into a small eternity. She forced her face into neutrality, remembering William's words on the dance floor. "Don't give them a reaction." But Michael's stare made it feel impossible, like he could peel the truth straight from her skin. Finally, with a soft chuckle, he turned toward the door. "Well, enjoy your evening, both of you. I'll be watching." His parting words hung heavy in the air long after he left. Chloe sagged against the nearest chair, her knees weak. "This is insane," she whispered. "Whatever this is, you're in the middle of something I don't even understand, and now I'm your cover." William crouched slightly, bringing his face level with hers. His hand pressed gently against the armrest, close but not touching. His eyes softened by a fraction, though the storm beneath them remained. "You're not just a cover," he said. "You're the only piece they won't see coming." Her throat went dry. "I don't even know what that means." "You don't have to. Not yet." He stood, straightening his jacket, and offered his hand. "But if you want to walk out of here tonight, Chloe, you'll take my hand and play the part. No hesitation. No cracks. You'll be mine until the last guest leaves." Her mind screamed at her to refuse, to run, to tear herself free of whatever dangerous performance he was staging. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw no opening, no escape. He was already pulling her back into the fire, and she realized with a shiver that the only way out might be through. She slipped her hand into his. The moment their palms met again, William's posture shifted back into effortless command. He opened the lounge door, leading her out into the hum of voices, the glitter of gowns, the press of too many eyes. They re-entered the ballroom like actors stepping back on a stage, every head subtly turning, every whisper rising in a chorus Chloe couldn't escape. "Smile," William murmured without looking at her. She forced one, her lips aching with the effort. The laughter, the music, the sparkling glasses, it all blurred around her. But she felt their stares, heavy, curious, predatory. And in the corner of her vision, she saw James again, his smirk curved like a blade, watching them with the hunger of a man waiting for a mask to slip. Dinner was announced. The crowd flowed toward the long dining tables, covered in ivory linens and gleaming gold plates. William guided her to the head table, where his presence commanded silence the moment he sat. Chloe lowered herself beside him, her pulse pounding in her throat as she caught sight of Michael across from them, James only 2 seats away. Haley sat further down, her eyes flicking between Chloe and William with confusion she couldn't disguise. Conversation buzzed, but underneath it, tension pulsed like an unspoken secret binding every guest to the table. Chloe reached for her glass of water to steady her trembling hands, only to freeze when she noticed something strange. A folded card lay at her setting, but it wasn't like the others with engraved names and floral designs. This one was plain, off-white, slipped almost carelessly between her plate and her napkin. Her stomach tightened as she slid it into her lap, opening it beneath the table. The words were scrawled in ink, hurried but deliberate. "Leave him before it's too late." Chloe's heart stopped. Her gaze shot to William, who was calmly exchanging words with one of the men seated nearby, as though nothing were wrong. He didn't see. No one saw. Her hands shook as she closed the card, her pulse hammering so loud she could barely hear the orchestra's music. She wanted to ask him, to demand answers right now, but something in her gut screamed not to. Whoever had placed it here had done so without anyone noticing. And if she revealed it, she might expose herself before she understood what the warning meant. She tucked the card into the folds of her dress, her face carefully neutral as William's hand brushed against hers beneath the table. He didn't look at her, didn't break from conversation, but his touch was steady, grounding, protective. And yet, for the first time that night, Chloe wondered if the danger wasn't only circling them in the crowd. What if it was sitting right beside her? The warning card burned against Chloe's thigh as if it had a pulse of its own. She tried to focus on the clink of silverware, on the hum of conversation at the table, but her eyes kept darting to the card tucked in the folds of her dress, hidden but unbearably present. She shifted slightly, her heart racing faster with every second. William sat beside her, perfectly composed, his voice low and confident as he responded to a toast, his hand never straying far from hers under the table. To anyone watching, they looked untouchable, an effortless pair. But inside, Chloe was unraveling. Who wrote it? Who had been close enough to slip the warning onto her plate without being noticed? Her gaze flicked around the table, careful not to linger too long on any one person. Michael caught her glance, raising his glass in mock salute, his eyes glittering like he knew something she didn't. James leaned back in his chair, a lazy smile curving his mouth, though his gaze kept sliding back to her, sharp as a blade. Further down, Haley whispered something to the woman beside her, her face tight, suspicious, maybe even hurt. Chloe forced herself to look away, her pulse loud in her ears. "Eat," William murmured, his voice just for her. She blinked, realizing she hadn't touched her food. "I'm not hungry," she whispered back. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and assessing, like he could read every thought she was trying to hide. "You need to look hungry. For appearances." The words stung, though she didn't understand why. She lowered her gaze, forcing herself to pick up the fork, but the food might as well have been ash in her mouth. The taste didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the note, and the way the people around this table seemed to be watching her with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. Halfway through the meal, William excused himself to speak with one of the hosts across the room. The moment he rose, Chloe felt the room shift, as though a net tightened around her. Michael leaned forward, his smile wolfish. "So, Chloe," he said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough for others nearby to hear. "Tell us, Where did you and William meet? It's such a mystery. One day, he's alone. The next, he walks in with you. All eyes turn to her, waiting. Chloe's chest tightened. She hadn't prepared for this. She hadn't even known she'd be here tonight. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. Then James chuckled softly, the sound carrying a different kind of menace. Maybe he plucked her out of thin air. That would explain why none of us have ever seen her before. Chloe's fingers trembled on her fork. Her pulse screamed in her ears. They were circling her like predators, waiting for her to slip. She remembered William's warning, play the part. No cracks. Forcing a smile, she lifted her chin. William and I prefer to keep some things private, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Not every relationship needs an audience. For a split second, silence stretched. Then a ripple of laughter moved down the table, polite but edged with disbelief. Michael's smile widened, though his eyes darkened. James raised his glass in mock acknowledgement, his smirk sharpened. Well played, he murmured. Chloe exhaled slowly, her chest tight. She could feel William watching from across the room, his gaze locked on her even as he spoke to another guest. Something flickered in his expression, a faint nod, approval, maybe even a hint of relief. But before she could settle into that small victory, the warning card pulsed in her mind again. Leave him before it's too late. When the dinner finally ended and the guests began to disperse toward the adjoining parlor for brandy and music, Chloe slipped her hand into her dress pocket, fingering the folded card again. She needed answers. She needed to know if William was the danger she was being warned about, or if he was the only thing keeping her safe. As they moved toward the parlor, William's hand found her back again, guiding her with practiced ease. You handled them well, he murmured, his voice low. Did I? She whispered back, her tone sharper than she intended. Because it didn't feel like it. His gaze flicked to her, narrowing slightly. You kept them from tearing you apart. That's enough for now. The words weren't comforting. They were survival, nothing more. Chloe bit down on the urge to pull out the card right there and shove it in his face. Not with so many ears and eyes still tracking them. Not with Michael and James shadowing their steps like vultures. In the parlor, the crowd thinned into smaller groups, laughter rising in bursts as the night wore on. A piano played softly in the corner. Chloe stood by the window, her reflection fractured in the glass, her mind a storm. William had stepped aside to speak quietly with an older man she didn't recognize. Michael drifted near the fireplace, laughing with a cluster of women, but glancing at her too often for it to be accidental. James lounged in a chair, one arm draped carelessly, though his eyes never left her. She pulled the card from her pocket, holding it low by her thigh. The ink gleamed faintly under the lamplight. Leave him before it's too late. Her throat tightened. Who had written it? And what did they mean? You look pale. Chloe jumped, nearly dropping the card. Haley stood beside her, concern etched across her face. Her friend's voice was low, urgent. Chloe, what's happening? Why are you with him? Chloe scrambled for words, but her throat was dry. Haley's hand brushed hers, and for a moment, Chloe considered showing her the note. But then she caught James's reflection in the window, his smirk carved in glass, watching them even from across the room. If she revealed it now, she'd be exposed. I can't explain, Chloe whispered, her voice fraying. Not here. Haley's eyes searched hers, worry tightening into suspicion. Then when Chloe couldn't answer, William appeared at her side again, his presence like a shadow stretching over them. Haley, he said, smooth and polite. Enjoying yourself? Haley's smile tightened. Immensely. She gave Chloe one last searching look before stepping away. Chloe exhaled shakily, but William's eyes caught hers before she could collect herself. He glanced down, and for a heartbeat she thought he'd seen the card in her hand. She shoved it back in her pocket, her pulse racing. His gaze lingered on her a second longer, then softened. You're trembling. I'm fine, she lied. He tilted his head slightly, like he didn't believe her, but chose not to push. Stay close to me. Don't drift too far tonight. Chloe wanted to scream. At him. At the room. At the note burning like a brand in her pocket. Instead, she nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. And across the parlor, James leaned closer to Michael, their voices low, their eyes flicking to Chloe. They were plotting something. She could feel it in her bones. And though William's hand brushed hers again, steadying, Chloe couldn't silence the thought that maybe the warning was right. Maybe staying close to him wasn't safety at all. Maybe it was the very thing that would destroy her. The ride home was suffocating. Chloe sat beside William in the back of his sleek black car, the city lights sweeping over them in gold and silver flashes. The silence between them pressed heavier than any words. William's arm rested against the leather seat, his posture deceptively relaxed, but Chloe could feel the tension rolling off him. He hadn't spoken much since the gathering ended, and his unreadable calm only made the warning card burn hotter in her pocket. She twisted her hands together in her lap, the paper hidden between her fingers. Leave him before it's too late. The words pulsed in her mind, louder than the hum of the engine. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but something in his profile stopped her. The sharp line of his jaw, the controlled way he held himself. It was as though every inch of him was a fortress built to keep her, or maybe everyone, from finding the truth. Finally, she broke. "William," she said, her voice low but trembling, "why did they look at me like that tonight?" His eyes flicked toward her briefly before returning to the road ahead. "Because you're new. That's not all," she pressed, heat creeping into her tone. "They weren't just curious. They were circling, waiting for me to slip." "Exactly," he said evenly. "Which is why you didn't." Chloe stared at him, her pulse quickening. "So you admit it. You put me in the middle of something dangerous." His gaze shifted back to her, sharp, assessing, but his voice stayed calm. "You walked in with me, Chloe. That was enough to make you a target. Not because of you, because of me." The word struck harder than she expected. "Then why bring me at all? Why ask me to act like I'm yours?" For the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his gaze flicking out the window as if searching for patience. "Because I needed someone who wasn't already tangled in their games. Someone they couldn't predict. Someone unshakable." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Unshakable?" I nearly choked on my own name tonight. He finally turned fully to her, his eyes locking onto hers. They were darker than usual, stormier, like the calm had finally given way to something more dangerous. "But you didn't. You smiled. You fought back. You made them question themselves. That's more than most people manage in their first round with Michael and James." At the sound of their names, Chloe's stomach knotted. She remembered Michael's wolfish grin, James's lazy but predatory stare. "And what happens in the second round?" she asked, her voice dropping. "Or the third? Do I keep pretending until they swallow me whole?" William didn't answer immediately. The car slowed as they turned onto the long, winding drive that led to his estate. Lights glowed along the path, guiding them through the night. But Chloe felt no comfort in the sight. Her chest constricted. "You're not in this alone," William said finally, softer now. She almost laughed again, but the ache in her chest silenced her. Instead, she gripped the warning card tighter in her hand, hidden in the folds of her dress. "Then explain this," she whispered, thrusting it toward him before she could change her mind. The car's dim light caught the words as he took the card from her. His eyes scanned it quickly, his expression unreadable, but his grip on the paper tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, his jaw flexing once before he tucked the card into his pocket. "That's it," Chloe demanded, her voice rising. "You're not surprised? You're not even going to ask who gave it to me?" William's gaze cut back to hers, sharp enough to make her breath hitch. "If someone wanted to warn you, they succeeded. If someone wanted to rattle you, they succeeded. Either way, acknowledging it too much gives them power." Her chest heaved. "So I'm just supposed to ignore the fact that someone thinks you're dangerous?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "I am dangerous, Chloe. That's what keeps people like Michael and James from destroying everything I've built. That's what keeps you safe." Her breath caught in her throat. The proximity, the weight of his words, the intensity in his eyes, it all pressed against her like a force she couldn't escape. She wanted to pull back, to push him away, but her body betrayed her, frozen between fear and something far more dangerous. When the car stopped at the front steps of his house, she was the first to slip out, the cool night air hitting her like a slap. William followed, silent, his steps steady behind her. Inside, the house was warm and glowing, its vast rooms echoing faintly with the hush of late hours. Chloe moved quickly to the sitting room, needing space, needing distance. She turned on him as soon as he entered. "You can't just expect me to play along without answers," she said, her voice sharp. "I don't know what I've stepped into, but I know enough to realize it's more than a simple dinner." William's eyes narrowed, the storm in them darker now. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the space between them. "And if I gave you the answers, Chloe, what then? Would you run?" Her throat tightened. The truth balanced on her lips. Maybe I should. But the thought of walking away, of leaving him in this tangle of shadows, made her chest ache in a way she didn't understand. Instead, she whispered, "Maybe I'd finally know if I should trust you." The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then William reached out, his hand brushing against hers, his touch warm, steady, almost pleading. "Trust me," he said softly, his voice breaking just slightly. "That's all I ask." Chloe's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She wanted to pull her hand away to guard herself, but her fingers curled around his almost involuntarily. The connection burned, an anchor, a chain, she couldn't decide which. And across the estate grounds, unseen in the shadows, a figure lingered just beyond the gates, watching the house. Waiting. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the wide windows of William's estate, painting the room in soft gold. Chloe sat at the edge of the guest bed, still in last night's borrowed silk robe, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the card, the letters carved into her mind like scars. "Leave him before it's too late." She told herself to leave, to walk away now, before she became whatever too late meant. But she hadn't. She was still here, wrapped in a stranger's robe, caught in the gravitational pull of William Maddox. And when she heard the quiet knock on her door, her chest tightened with a mix of dread and anticipation. "Come in," she whispered. William stepped inside, dressed in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He carried himself like the night before hadn't happened, like he hadn't told her he was dangerous, like he hadn't looked at her with eyes that both terrified and unmoored her. "You didn't sleep," he said simply, studying her face. Chloe bristled. "Neither did you." He gave a faint, knowing smile, then crossed to the window. His hand rested casually on the frame, but his posture was taut, restless. "There are things you're not ready to hear, Chloe. But you need to understand, being near me means being a target. You saw that last night." She set the mug down sharply on the bedside table. "And I saw a note telling me to run from you. You can't keep pretending it's just about Michael or James. Whoever left, that note wasn't warning me about them. They were warning me about you." His eyes flicked to her, unreadable, but the muscle in his jaw betrayed him. "Do you believe it?" Chloe froze. The question was simple, but it pierced too deeply. Did she believe William Maddox was the danger? The truth was she didn't know, and that not knowing was worse than certainty. "I don't know what to believe," she admitted, her voice raw. William's gaze softened for the briefest second. "Then stay close. Watch for yourself. Don't take their word. Don't take mine. Decide when you've seen enough." The words wrapped around her like a challenge and a lifeline all at once. Before she could answer, William's phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes narrowing at the screen. His posture stiffened. "What is it?" she asked quickly, dread curling in her stomach. "Security alert," he said, his tone clipped now. He strode to the door. "Stay here." But Chloe was already moving. "No, I'm not staying locked away while you pretend this doesn't involve me." He stopped, glanced back at her, and for a long moment they stared at each other in silent battle. Finally, he sighed, muttering something under his breath before jerking his head toward the hallway. "Fine, but stay behind me." They moved quickly through the house, the quiet replaced by a sharp, tense energy. Downstairs, two of William's security staff were speaking in low voices near the main entrance. When they saw him, they straightened instantly. Mr. Maddox, someone attempted to breach the east gate around dawn, one of them reported. They disappeared before we could apprehend them, but they were watching the house. Chloe's breath caught. The shadow from last night. She hadn't imagined it. William's face darkened, his control faltering just enough for Chloe to glimpse the storm underneath. Tighten patrols. I want every angle covered, no excuses. Yes, sir. The guards moved swiftly, leaving William and Chloe standing alone in the cavernous foyer. She could feel the air vibrating with the weight of what had just been revealed. They're watching you, she whispered. They always have, he replied flatly. Then his eyes met hers, sharp as glass. But now they're watching you too. Her stomach twisted. She stepped back, the reality hitting her harder than the note ever had. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had come to the gates. Someone had been here. Why me? She demanded, her voice trembling. I was no one before you pulled me into this. Why would they care about me? Because I made them care, William said without hesitation. His words dropped like stones, heavy and irreversible. The moment I took your hand in that room, I told them you mattered. And that's enough for them to use you. Her pulse thundered in her ears. So what am I supposed to do now, William? Keep pretending? Keep smiling like I don't know they're circling? His hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against her arm, steadying her. You're supposed to let me protect you. The touch burned her skin, not just with heat, but with the weight of choice. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it scared her. But the voice in her head whispered the warning again and again. Leave him before it's too late. She stepped back, pulling her arm from his grasp. What if protection isn't enough? What if being near you is the very thing that destroys me? William's eyes darkened further, but before he could answer, a sudden, sharp sound echoed from outside. A car engine revving hard, tires screeching against pavement. Chloe's heart leapt in her throat as William moved instantly to the window. A sleek black sedan sped past the front gates, slowing just long enough for the tinted window to lower. Chloe caught only a glimpse, a man's face, shadowed but smirking, as something small and metallic clattered against the drive before the car tore away into the distance. William cursed under his breath, already striding toward the door. Chloe followed on instinct, her chest tight. One of the guards retrieved the object from the ground, handing it to William with a grim look. It was a bullet casing, polished, deliberate, a message. Chloe's knees nearly buckled. Her mind screamed at her that this wasn't a game, wasn't a charade. Someone was warning them, or threatening them. Either way, it was real. William's hand clenched around the casing, his knuckles white. They're escalating, he muttered, almost to himself. Chloe's eyes burned with fear, but beneath it, something else bloomed, defiance. She met his gaze, her voice unsteady but fierce. Then tell me the truth, William. All of it. Because if I'm going to be a target, I deserve to know what I'm up against. He stared at her, the storm in his eyes raging, his silence stretching into something unbearable. Then he slipped the casing into his pocket, his jaw set. Tonight, he said at last, his voice low and rough. You'll have your answers tonight. And as the morning sun rose higher over the estate, Chloe knew the real danger wasn't just at the gates. It was inside these walls, waiting for the truth to tear everything apart. The day crawled like a storm dragging across the horizon. Every corner of William's estate buzzed with quiet urgency, guards doubling their patrols, phones buzzing with clipped updates, shadows moving just a little too close to the gates. Chloe felt it in her bones, a pressure building, a fuse waiting to catch. And through it all, William was a fortress of silence, locked in meetings behind heavy doors, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and edged like steel. By the time dusk painted the sky in bruised colors, Chloe was restless, pacing the length of the library with her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She couldn't stop replaying the moment that casing clinked against the stones, the gleam of it catching the light, deliberate and merciless. Whoever was out there wanted them rattled, wanted her rattled. And it was working. The library doors opened suddenly, and William stepped inside. His shirt was rumpled now, his tie loosened, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked tired. Not weak. Never weak, but tired in a way that made her chest ache. You said tonight, Chloe whispered, her voice catching before she steadied it. You said you'd tell me the truth. He closed the door behind him, his eyes locking on hers. There was no storm hiding in them this time, no armor, just raw intensity. You're right, he said quietly. You deserve that much. She braced herself, her heart pounding. Michael and James, he began, moving closer. They're not just rivals. They've been circling for years, waiting for a crack in everything I've built. They don't just want my company, Chloe. They want to dismantle me piece by piece. My allies, my reputation, my future. And now, he hesitated, his jaw tightening. Now they think they've found the perfect way. Through you. Her stomach dropped. Through me? But I don't matter to them. You do, he said firmly, stopping just in front of her. Because I showed them you matter to me. The words landed heavy, sharp, leaving her breathless. But I don't, I'm not. You are, he interrupted, his voice breaking with an intensity that pinned her in place. The moment I took your hand, I made you part of this war. And I won't pretend it's safe. It's not. But I'll burn the world before I let them touch you. Her heart twisted violently, torn between the raw power of his vow and the icy terror of what it meant. She wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into the strength in his voice, but another truth clawed at her chest. The note, the warning, the reminder that maybe the real danger wasn't outside. It was standing right in front of her. Before she could speak, the sound of shattering glass split the air. Both of them froze. Another crash followed, deeper in the house, then the muffled shouts of guards. William moved instantly, pulling her toward him. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice razor-sharp now. Her pulse thundered as they rushed into the hallway. The lights flickered, and the air smelled faintly of smoke. 2 guards sprinted past, shouting about the West Wing. Chloe's body screamed to run, but her feet moved only because William's hand gripped hers with unshakable force. They turned a corner just as another window exploded inward, shards spraying across the marble floor. Chloe screamed, William's arm wrapping around her instinctively, shielding her as the glass rained down. A brick clattered across the tiles, a note taped to its rough surface. William kicked it aside, pulling her down the hall. Shouts echoed. Footsteps thundered. Alarms blared faintly in the distance. The estate, usually so impenetrable, suddenly felt like a battlefield. When they reached the grand hall, William spun to face her, his hands gripping her shoulders. His eyes burned with something between fury and desperation. Listen to me. They want you scared. They want you broken. Don't give them that. Her breath came in shallow gasps, fear clawing at her chest. But what if they get in? What if? They won't. He cut in, his tone unyielding. But his eyes betrayed the truth. He wasn't certain. The doors at the far end slammed open, and 2 men in masks burst inside, weapons glinting under the dim light. Chloe's scream ripped through the air before William yanked her behind him, his body shielding hers completely. Go! He barked at the guards rushing in, but he never loosened his grip on Chloe. The room erupted in chaos, shouts, the clash of bodies, the sickening sound of fists and bone. Chloe clung to William's arm, her nails digging into his skin, her body trembling so violently she thought she'd collapse. She had never seen violence this close, never felt danger breathing against her neck, and it was too much, too real. Then one of the masked men broke free, lunging toward them. William shoved Chloe aside, intercepting him with brutal precision. The sound of the struggle, the grunt of impact, the thud of fists, echoed through the hall. Chloe pressed back against the wall, her breath ragged, her vision blurring. It felt endless, but within minutes the attackers were subdued, dragged away by William's guards. Silence crashed back over the hall, broken only by Chloe's ragged sobs. William turned back to her, blood smeared across his knuckles, his chest heaving. His eyes found hers, and in them she saw the truth, not just the danger, not just the power, but the vulnerability he never let anyone see. Are you hurt? He demanded, striding to her, his hands brushing frantically over her arms, her shoulders. She shook her head, but tears streamed down her face. "You could have been killed," she choked out. His jaw clenched, his eyes softening for the briefest moment. "So could you." Her chest heaved, her body torn apart by fear and something she couldn't name. She wanted to scream at him, to demand why he dragged her into this, but all she could do was clutch his shirt, trembling, broken. "Why me, William?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why did you choose me?" He froze, his hands stilling on her arms. His eyes locked on hers, and for the first time, she saw something unguarded there, something fragile. "Because you were the only one who looked at me like I wasn't a monster," he whispered. The words shattered her, left her breathless. And in the silence that followed, as the guards secured the hall and the danger momentarily passed, Chloe realized this was their breaking point. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she finally saw how deep she had fallen, and how far she could still fall. The estate had never felt so cold. Even after the intruders were dragged out, even after the alarms faded and the windows were boarded, a chill lingered in the air like the walls themselves had absorbed the violence. Chloe sat on the edge of William's grand four-poster bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms trembling as she clutched the silk sheets. Her hair was messy, her face streaked with tears, but she didn't care. All she could hear was the sound of glass shattering, the rush of footsteps, William's voice barking orders, the sight of masked men charging at them, at her. And William, fists flying, blood on his knuckles, eyes wild with a rage that both terrified and captivated her. He was across the room now, pacing like a caged predator, his phone pressed to his ear. His shirt was half torn, his sleeves rolled up, his jaw shadowed with tension. He looked like a man who had been carved out of fury and control. But when his gaze flicked toward her, she saw something else. Fear. Yes, he snapped into the phone. Double the guards. No excuses. If anyone steps foot on this property without clearance, I'll have their head. He paused, listened, then hung up with a sharp click. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Chloe swallowed, her throat raw. "They almost killed us." William turned, his eyes locking on hers. "They failed. That's not the point." Her voice cracked, breaking through the numbness that had been holding her still. She swung her legs off the bed, standing on unsteady feet. "This isn't just business, William. This is war, and you're dragging me into the middle of it." His jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see what it's doing to you?" He took a step closer, his voice low but edged with frustration. "But I can't undo it. The moment I touched you, the moment I let them see you mattered to me, it was too late." Her chest heaved. "Then why? Why pull me in at all? You could have kept me away, kept me safe." His eyes burned into hers, the weight of his silence louder than any answer. And then, finally, he whispered, "Because I couldn't." The words hit her like a blow, but they didn't soothe her. They ripped her open instead. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "You don't get it, William. I'm not built for this. I'm not you. I can't walk through blood and fire and pretend it doesn't break me. I can't." Her voice faltered, her chest heaving. "I can't keep wondering if the next time that door bursts open, I'll die because I fell for the wrong man." The silence between them cracked. William's hands curled into fists at his sides, his shoulders rigid. "Then leave," he said flatly. Her breath caught. "What? If you can't take it, if this is too much, then leave," he repeated, his voice cold now, clipped as though detachment was the only thing keeping him together. "I won't stop you." The words gutted her. She searched his face, desperate for a crack, for any sign that he didn't mean it. But his eyes were unreadable again, his walls rebuilt in an instant. Her heart screamed to her to run to him, to fight for him. But her body felt frozen, torn between terror and longing. "Do you want me to leave?" she whispered. William's jaw flexed, his silence stretching until it felt like it might shatter her. Finally, he turned away. "I want you safe. And with me, you'll never be safe." The admission broke her. She turned, stumbling toward the door, her vision blurred with tears. The guard stationed in the hallway shifted uncomfortably as she brushed past them, but none dared stop her. She moved like a ghost down the corridors, her hands trembling, her heart cracking with every step. By the time she reached the far end of the estate, her legs felt like lead. She leaned against the wall, pressing her palm over her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. The memory of his voice, "Leave," echoed like a curse. But then she heard it. Low voices. Not guards. She froze, straining to listen. The boss said it's time. They'll be distracted watching the girl. That's when we strike. Her stomach dropped. She pressed closer to the wall, her pulse hammering. Tonight, another voice asked. Before dawn. Her breath caught. They weren't finished. The attack earlier hadn't been the end. It was just the beginning. Fear shot through her veins, but underneath it was something sharper. If she walked away now, if she left William, he would be destroyed. He was strong, yes, but even he couldn't fight a war with knives pressed to his throat from the inside. Someone close to him was leaking information. Someone was planning his downfall from within. Her body shook as she backed away, her mind racing. She could leave, disappear into the night, and never look back. But the thought of William falling, not just his empire, but him, clawed at her until she couldn't breathe. Tears stung her eyes as the truth settled like a weight on her chest. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until she knew he was safe. She spun and ran back through the halls, her footsteps echoing against the marble. She found him still in the grand hall, speaking in low tones to one of his men. His eyes snapped to her immediately, widening at the sight of her pale face. "What is it?" he demanded, striding toward her. Chloe's chest heaved as she forced the words out. "It's not over. They're coming again. Before dawn." The guard stiffened, but William didn't flinch. His gaze burned into hers, sharp, unyielding. "Where did you hear this?" I overheard them. Two men in the east corridor. They said the attack tonight was just to distract you." Silence fell, heavy and lethal. William's jaw clenched as he turned to the guard. "Lock down every corridor. No one moves without my word. Find out who those men are." The guard bolted, leaving them alone. William turned back to Chloe, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out, cupping her face in his blood-stained hand. "You should have run," he whispered. Her breath trembled. "I couldn't." For the first time, his walls cracked. His forehead pressed against hers, his voice low and rough. "Then God help us both." The estate felt like a fortress under siege. Guards patrolled every corner. Radios crackled with urgent codes, and the air was thick with anticipation, as if even the walls knew an unseen enemy lurked close. But inside the grand hall, silence reigned. William stood at the center of it, his back straight, his eyes scanning every flicker of movement with the precision of a man who'd built his empire on never missing a detail. Chloe sat to his right, perched on the edge of an armchair, her fingers clutched tight together, trying to still the tremor in her hands. She couldn't shake the voices she'd overheard. Before dawn, the words were branded into her mind. And William, he hadn't let her leave his side since. He hadn't said it, but she knew. He didn't trust anyone else anymore. Not even the men he'd trained, the men who swore loyalty with their lives. Because somewhere among them was a traitor. The doors to the hall opened with a creak, and 5 of William's most trusted men entered. James, his head of security. Michael, the strategist. Liam, his financial overseer. Haley, his public liaison. And Victor, the one who had been by his side the longest, his right-hand man. They stood in a line before him, their faces shadowed by tension. William's gaze was like ice. "Someone in this room is selling me out." The words cut through the silence like a blade. No one moved. No one breathed. Chloe felt her stomach twist, her pulse racing as she looked at their faces. James's jaw was tight, Michael's brow furrowed, Liam's hands fidgeted, Haley's lips pressed thin. Only Victor stood calm, his eyes steady, unreadable. William's voice dropped lower, deadlier. The attack tonight wasn't random. They knew where to hit when a strike. That doesn't happen without inside knowledge. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating. "So I'll ask once. Who betrayed me?" Still silence. Chloe swallowed hard. Her chest felt like it might crack open under the pressure. She wanted to scream, to beg someone to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Then William's eyes narrowed on Liam. "You've been nervous all night." Liam flinched. "Because I almost died out there." His voice cracked, too sharp, too defensive. "You think I'd risk everything I've worked for?" "Maybe not for money," William said coldly. "But fear makes men weak." Chloe watched Liam's eyes dart, watched sweat bead on his brow. And for a moment, she thought it had to be him. But then her gaze drifted sideways, toward Victor. Calm, too calm. His face a mask, his stance unshaken while the others cracked under the weight. A chill ran down her spine. "William," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not Liam." Every eye turned to her. William's gaze sharpened. "Then who?" Her breath caught, but she forced the word out. "Victor." For the first time, Victor moved. Just slightly. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. William's fists clenched. "Say it again." Chloe rose, her knees trembling, but her voice steadied as she looked Victor in the eye. "It's him." He didn't flinch. He didn't react. Because he already knew what happened. The silence cracked open like thunder. And Victor laughed. A low, bitter sound. "Smart girl." The others stiffened, their hands twitching toward their weapons. But William raised a hand, freezing them in place. His eyes never left Victor's. "Why?" Victor's mask finally slipped, his voice sharp with venom. "Because you forgot where you came from. Because you built an empire on loyalty, but you never saw who was standing in your shadow, cleaning up your messes. I gave you everything, William. My years, my hands, my blood. And you," his lip curled, "you gave me scraps." Chloe's chest tightened. She could see it in William's eyes, the betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. This wasn't just a business partner. This was family. "You could have asked me for anything," William said, his voice low, raw, "and I would have given it." Victor's laugh was hollow. "Respect isn't given. It's taken." The words hung heavy in the air, poison dripping from every syllable. Chloe stepped closer to William, her hand brushing his arm, grounding him. She could feel the storm raging inside him, the fury clawing to be unleashed. But beneath it was something far more dangerous, heartbreak. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't let him win by tearing you apart." For a moment, William didn't move. His chest rose and felt like he was holding back an earthquake. Then, slowly, he exhaled. His eyes locked on Victor one last time. "You're finished." The guards moved in, seizing Victor's arms. He didn't fight. He just smirked, his gaze flicking to Chloe. "Careful, girl. You think you've saved him, but you've only made him weaker." They dragged him out, his laughter echoing down the hall until the doors slammed shut. Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. William stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor, his jaw tight enough to crack. Chloe hesitated, then stepped closer, her hand sliding into his. His fingers twitched, then slowly closed around hers, gripping like he was afraid to let go. "He was your family," she whispered. William's voice was rough, broken at the edges. Not anymore. Her chest ached for him. For all his power, all his control, she'd never seen him like this, stripped bare, vulnerable. And somehow, it made her love him even more. "You still have me," she said softly. His eyes lifted, meeting hers, and for the first time that night, something cracked in his armor. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, his body trembling as if the weight of the world had finally caught up to him. She held him tighter, her own tears slipping free. Not because she was afraid anymore, but because she knew, no matter how dark his world was, no matter how many enemies lurked in the shadows, she would stand by him. Not because he was a billionaire, not because he had chosen her, but because somewhere along the way, she had chosen him too. And for William, for them both, that was enough. The war outside wasn't over. But in that moment, in the stillness of the grand hall, Chloe knew one thing with unshakable certainty. They would face it together. Forever, if need be.